Carl Tanzler would spend his evenings passionately dancing in his living room, but one night he had the curtains wide open for everyone to have a look inside his living room, and someone saw that he appeared to be dancing with this life-size doll. This person got a little bit closer to the window, and as they got closer, they could see that this was no doll. They realized that he was actually dancing with a real dead and decaying corpse of a woman that Carl was once in love with. Hi, I'm Yasmin, and I tell stories about things that are true, but they're always a little bit disturbing or scary in some way. So please subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and we'll get on with it. George Carl Tanzler was also known as Count Carl von Cosel, although no one ever really called him this, and this wasn't an official name. He wasn't actually a count. He was an extremely weird guy, to say the least. He was born in Dresden, Germany in 1877, and all the strangeness sort of started when he was a kid. Carl used to live in a house that was haunted by one of their relatives, apparently, and when he was a child he had this strange dream, and it was almost like a premonition. He explained that the person who was haunting their family home came and showed them a girl that he was destined to be with. This girl looked exotic. She had dark hair, olive skin, and she was extremely beautiful. The image of this girl was stuck in Carl's mind for the rest of his life, and in a really messed up way, it came true. Carl was a really intelligent child, and as he grew up, he became even more eccentric, essentially. He had a massive passion for physics, mathematics, medicine, electricity, and astronomy. And by the age of 24, he actually graduated from university with a master's degree, and he apparently studied medicine too, but actually never became a fully qualified doctor. I think he just studied the theory of it. Either way, he had some medical knowledge, and this becomes important later on. In his 20s, he got married to a woman named Doris Schaefer, and they ended up having 2 children. After the war in 1926, him and his family decided to move from Dresden to Zephyr Hills in Florida, which is where his sister was living at the time as well. But only after about a year of living there, he just abandoned his family out of nowhere, and he moved to an area called Key West in Florida. In Key West, he had a job working as a radiology technician at the US Marine Hospital, and specifically he worked in the tuberculosis ward. And I'm really sorry, I've always struggled saying that word. I'm going to call it TB from here on out. So back in those days, TB was basically a death sentence. There was no cure for it, quality of life was pretty terrible, and the care that patients had was mainly palliative. So the TB ward was part of their end-of-life care, just making the patients quite comfortable. Carl was a radiology technician, so it didn't mean that he was a doctor, it just meant that he operated the x-rays and things, and he was sort of out and about with the patients in this TB ward. Carl really took it upon himself to tell people that there was a cure for TB, and he had the cure, even though there was nothing to back this up. And he wasn't even a qualified doctor, so I don't even know why he was saying this stuff. But anyway, he was saying this to all the patients in the ward. But he paid special attention to one woman in the ward, and she arrived on April 22nd, 1930. And this was 22-year-old Maria Elena de Hoyos, who was also known as Helen. She was brought into the TB ward by her mother, and she was really sick, but as soon as Carl saw her, he knew this was the woman of his dreams, literally. This was the woman that he apparently saw in that childhood dream he had when that person who haunted his house came and spoke to him at night. Carl, at this time, was 55 years old, and when he saw that 22-year-old girl, he was in love. Elena was a Cuban lady, and she had dark hair, she looked exotic, she had beautiful olive skin, and everyone thought she was beautiful. But the problem was Elena was extremely ill with TB, and the second thing was that she was actually married to a man called Lucius at this time, but after she suffered a miscarriage, her and Lucius actually were separated, so Lucius lived somewhere else in Florida, I believe. Carl didn't care though. He quickly went to Elena's bedside and went above and beyond his professional duties to take care of her. He became completely obsessed with trying to cure her. He'd bring her gifts, he'd bring her jewelry, he'd make these special concoctions at home that would apparently cure her. But her condition just kept getting worse and worse. He even confessed his love to her. Elena really didn't reciprocate any of this, probably because she was dying and she felt so unwell. But also this man was going the extra mile to save her life, so she really didn't want to be ungrateful and she didn't want to mess anything up, really. Unfortunately though, Elena's condition became quite critical and her family decided to take her back to their house so that she could rest and have her final days in the comfort of her own home. This didn't stop Carl though. He followed her to their house and he would make special medicinal concoctions at home which he would bring to their house for Elena. He'd steal equipment from the hospital, like x-ray machines and just other little bits of equipment. She got the ultimate special treatment. No one ever asked for this and it all came naturally from Carl. Sadly, even after Carl's efforts of trying to salvage her life, Elena passed away in her family home on the 25th of October in 1931 from TB-related complications. Carl offered to make funeral arrangements and pay for all of the funeral costs. He even commissioned a special white mausoleum to be made. And a mausoleum is basically like an above-ground grave, essentially. Elena was laid to rest in Key West Cemetery. No one actually knew, but Carl was the only person to have the key to the mausoleum. Carl's love only seemed to grow with time, even though Elena had passed. Every single night, Carl would sneak out and go to the cemetery to visit Elena's body. He'd make sure it was nighttime so that no one could actually see what he was doing. He'd keep her body company, he'd sing her favorite Spanish songs, he'd speak to her all throughout the night, and he did this for 2 years, consistently visiting her. 2 years of doing this, and then finally Elena started to apparently speak to Carl through the mausoleum door. She was apparently begging him to take her home. Do you think Carl would ever go against anything she said? No, of course not. So the next night he made arrangements, he made sure it was pitch black outside, and he brought along this little trolley. It was like a kid's trolley that he wheeled over. It was like a plastic wagon-like thing. He unlocked the mausoleum door and there was Elena's decomposing body. He grabbed a hold of it and he sort of wiggled it out of the mausoleum and placed her body on the wagon and took her away from the cemetery. How disgusting and crazy is that? I can't even imagine what that would smell like after 2 years of her body decomposing. Her soft tissue would have broken down to something that's like this liquidy mush. Her body would have been extremely delicate to transport anywhere, and her muscles would have been decomposing, so nothing would actually be holding the bones together properly either. Carl was really upset and shocked by the poor state of her body, but he was prepared for this. When he finally brought her home, he conveniently had this makeshift lab in his garden, and there he quickly got to work. He knew that there would be significant decomposition of her muscles and tendons, which meant that nothing would really be holding the bones together anymore. So to remedy this, he got some piano wire to secure the bones together. Next, onto her skin. Her skin had shriveled up and liquefied, so he removed some of it and actually replaced it with silk that he'd been dipping in wax. So he got the silk out of the wax and he molded it to the contour of her body, which sort of gave her this artificial look of skin. While he was doing this, he noticed that her abdominal cavity was caved in, which makes sense because she was decomposing. So to maintain the plump appearance, to be a little bit more realistic, he stuffed rags into her abdomen. He even thought about the hair. The hair that he made was disgusting. It was his mother's hair. He sort of stitched it into this wig and attached it onto Elena's decaying body. None of this, nothing at all, could get rid of that rancid smell of decaying human flesh. So he'd regularly go to the store and buy bottles and bottles of perfume to mask the smell, but nothing really got rid of it, not even the strongest perfume. It just sort of made it smell like perfume and bad. He also noticed that her eyes were shriveled up, so to give her some real looking eyes, he put in little glass eyes too. Once his creation was complete, he transferred the body to his bed, which is where the body would remain for 7 years. So he would move the body around in the house, but the body was mainly in the bed. Not a single person knew what Carl had in his house. And clearly no one ever came to visit him because the smell would have scared anybody away. It would have penetrated everything in his house, his couch, his walls, his carpet, everything. I actually feel sick even thinking about the smell. After 7 years, Carl started to get pretty bold. He would dance passionately in his living room with the decaying body, but one night he had the curtains wide open for everyone to have a look inside his living room, and someone saw that he appeared to be dancing with this life-size doll. This person got a little bit closer to the window, and as they got closer, they could see that this was no doll. They realized that he was actually dancing with a real dead and decaying corpse. They were totally shocked and contacted Elena's family, and Elena's sister was just like, what is going on? So she called the police, naturally. And the police did an investigation and they found that yes, Carl did have the real decaying body of Elena in his house, and he was actually arrested for grave robbing and destroying a grave. The police really doubted his mental state though, so they actually did a psychological exam to see if he was even fit to stand trial. And I'm pretty shocked, but he was actually fit to stand trial. During the trial, they wanted to know what prompted him to do this and what he was planning on doing with the body in the future. He told them his master plan, which I don't even know why. I just don't get it. This is what he wanted to do with Elena's body. Carl made this ridiculous contraption in his garden, and his plan was to stuff Elena's body into this contraption, somehow create so much force and shoot her off into space. When she was in space, she would get all this radiation, and apparently it would shock her cells and bring her back to life. And he truly thought this was going to work. Lucky for Carl though, the statute of limitations had run out for his crimes, and he was a free man. He didn't even go to prison. After all of this though, it became really big news in the town about what Carl did, but the reaction from the public was super unexpected. He was deemed as this really romantic guy. He received all this fan mail and ladies who were just wanting to, date him and be around him, and everyone wanted a piece of this guy. People saw him as a guy who would do anything for the person he loved, and he was almost put on a pedestal, which is just so messed up. But things get weirder. Elena's family decided to put her body on display for everyone to see what Carl had done to her body. So 7,000 people came to view the body, and I just thought that they would lay the body to rest after all of this. Her body has endured so much that why would they put it on display? Anyway, that's what they did. Once they were done with this display, she was taken back to Key West Cemetery and she was buried in an unmarked grave to ensure that Carl would never disturb her again. I wish that was all that happened, but it isn't. Carl couldn't be with any other woman in his life. He ended up dying at the age of 75, alone in his house, and he wasn't found for 3 weeks. After his death, they investigated his house and they found some really disturbing objects in there. Turns out he created life-size death masks of Elena's face. Yes, Carl created death masks of Elena when she was still in his home. Probably because he thought that, someone was going to catch him and he wasn't going to have the body anymore, so he made these death masks as insurance. Anyway, in his body, these death masks were attached to life-size dolls, and he clearly still pretended to live with the body of Elena. That was the really messed up story of Carl Tanzler. If you found that interesting, then please subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!